Man, this has been a crazy decade so far. Now, unless you live under a rock, you've likely heard the fears of this potential new global pandemic that is sweeping our world, infecting people across multiple countries. Entire cities are being shut down all over China. It's the coronavirus. And contrary to popular belief, this virus actually originated out of a contaminated bottle of Corona in Mexico. Okay, obviously that's a joke. It's called the coronavirus because it's from the class of coronaviruses, just like SARS and MERS. SARS was the last epidemic to come out of China. It was the severe acute respiratory syndrome, and MERS was a couple of years later. That was the Middle East respiratory syndrome. These are all types of a coronavirus. The molecule itself looks like it's wearing a crown. Corona means crown. These are a class of virus called the coronaviruses, and this is different than something like influenza, which is not a coronavirus. And so SARS and MERS were both coronaviruses. This is the Wuhan coronavirus. And I do not mean to make light of this situation because I know that in a situation like this, there are literally lives at stake. So what we're going to talk about today is how you can protect your portfolio and do a little bit of hedging, maybe do a little bit of speculating, try and make a little bit of money off of this. Depending on how severe it gets, we're going to look at some situations that you can protect yourself against, whether this is just completely overblown or whether it is going to turn into a global catastrophe. Let's dive in. Trust me, I'm a doctor. Okay, clearly if you've been around this channel at all, you know that I am the furthest thing from a doctor. I have absolutely zero medical experience. And so in my summary of this coronavirus and what it is and the risks, just know from the start that's coming from absolutely zero background in any medical related field whatsoever. It is strictly due to some of the research that I've been doing on this subject over the last couple of days. So before we look at how you can position your portfolio, one of the things we do have to look at is what we know and what we don't know about this virus to kind of give us a gauge of what we might be able to expect on the upper bounds and on the lower bounds as far as the impact that this might have on the economy and the global economy overall. So what do we not know? Because to be honest, at this point, since it's so early, the amount that we do not know is much greater than the amount that we do know. And that is one of the biggest reasons why risk management and hedging is so much more important at this early stage, because the unknowns are so great. In a situation where you have an epidemic and a pandemic, there are a couple of things that are very important to figure out. The first thing is the incubation period, and that's simply the amount of time that it takes from the virus or the infection to infect somebody all the way up to the point where they start showing symptoms. Now, at this point, it might be anywhere between 1 and 14 days, and obviously it can depend on the individual as well. It looks like with the data that is out, the average is about 10 days. Now, this wouldn't be an issue with something like SARS, because with something like SARS, you were not actually contagious until you started showing symptoms. The difference with the Wuhan coronavirus, though, is that it's confirmed now that you can actually be contagious before you start showing symptoms. So there are a lot of checks being put in place right now where people are getting their temperature checked at airports as they're getting off flights to see if they're showing any symptoms or not, to see if they're feverish. None of that really does any good because asymptomatic carriers exist with the coronavirus. And so you can be carrying and you can be infecting other people. You can be contagious for up to 2 weeks before you show any symptoms. And further than that, it can take days more before your symptoms get bad enough to where you actually feel the need to go check in at a hospital and put yourself under medical care where they can diagnose you. The second thing that we really don't have nailed down yet is the mortality rate. How many people die once they're infected? It looks like it could be anywhere from 10 to 40% right now. And lastly, we don't know what the actual reproductive ratio is of the coronavirus at this point. And a lot of that, again, is just due to how early it is. And the reproductive ratio is that big R with the underscore and then the number next to it that you're going to see on a lot of articles and videos that you watch if you look into this anymore. It's the rate at which one individual can infect a certain number of other individuals. So if it's got a reproductive rate of 3, that means that you on average, if you get infected, you will infect 3 other people. If the virus has a reproductive rate of under 1, that means it will eventually die off. because for every one person infected, they're infecting on average less than one other person. And so over time, as it runs its course, it will eventually die off. And so that's what you're gearing for. That's what your goal is. That's what you're looking for. If you're a policymaker, if you're in the medical field, if you're doing anything to try and contain this right now, you're trying to produce measures that will get that number underneath 1 so that it will die off and stop growing and stop spreading. At this point, despite the claims and despite what people are saying, despite the articles, there's no way right now to nail down a true reproductive rate just because of the lack of data that we have. Now, the worst part about these specific things being unknowns right now is that these are all 3 things that tend to be underestimated due to a lack of available data, due to the increase in transportation and global connectivity that we have, and due to a factor called fat-tailedness, where you can have certain individuals called super spreaders that are skewing that reproductive rate because one individual might infect 80 other people, and then over time you'll see that data kind of conglomerate into the middle so you can get more of an idea of what the reality is. Mortality rates are also downwardly biased just due to the fact there's a lag between identified cases, the deaths, and then the reporting of those deaths. And especially when something like this is starting in China, huge honor shame culture, there's a lot of effort right now, especially from the top down, to contain the real numbers, the real data. And quite frankly, the confirmed cases and the official numbers coming out of China right now don't really match the efforts that they're going into right now to try and stop the spread. They're building a brand new hospital within just a matter of days. It's going to be done in probably about 6 days here just to deal with cases like this. They're shutting down cities all over the country. And so the efforts that they're going into look like they're responding to a much greater crisis than the official numbers they're letting on to. So those are the things that we don't know. How does that tell us what we do know, and what are some precautionary things that we can do, especially to our portfolio about this? Number 1, it is safer to estimate up, and it's safer to estimate that things will be worse in situations like this where they can be much worse, where that risk of something really bad happening is much higher. It's safer to plan for the worst, because if you plan for the worst, hope for the best, then you're prepared. If you do the opposite, then something that's unlikely, a black swan event, can actually take you out. Secondly, there are a lot of similarities between this coronavirus and the Spanish flu from 1918. Now, contrary to popular beliefs, even 100 years ago, the world was extremely globalized and interconnected. The Spanish flu spread over the entire world and infected almost 1/3 of all humanity, and life still went on. The stock market stayed open, the store shelves stayed stocked, and so despite there being a global pandemic that had a catastrophic death toll, society kept moving. So if we can learn anything from history, the probability is that eventually this will blow over and it won't end up being a huge deal in the scheme of history. However, scientists have been predicting that something like this would happen within the next couple of years, couple of decades, due to the overuse of antibiotics in farming, the increase in globalization, and we know that crazy events happen from time to time in history that actually do have global catastrophic effects. So, how can we prepare? How can we hedge? How can we protect ourselves against something like this? Down from what if really nothing happens? How do I benefit off of that? All the way up to what if this is a big catastrophe? How can I protect myself? So first, we're going to look at how to hedge and protect just your life. This isn't specifically about your portfolio. We're going to look at some ways you can hedge your actual day-to-day living. Number 1, you can buy surgical masks. Now, all of these things, personally, I would do sooner rather than later, because if you wait until it's confirmed that you'll actually need surgical masks to go outside in your area, there aren't going to be any left in your area. So some of these things, especially the lower cost things, it's just better to do ahead of time, just in case. Yeah, you might spend a little bit of money, but then if you need it, you have it. If you wait until you do need it to try and get it, you won't be able to. Just like fire insurance or car insurance, you can't wait until your house is burning down to get fire insurance. You have to get it ahead of time. So number 1, buy surgical masks. And I've linked a ton of resources in the description below on where I've gotten some of this data from and some of these recommendations. However, in one of the articles that I have listed below on surgical masks and respirators, you'll find that it says that surgical masks aren't usually very effective, because they're usually more effective at preventing you from infecting other people rather than protecting you from actually contracting anything yourself. But in situations where you're dealing with a respiratory illness that is transmitted via water droplets from things like coughing or mucus, something like a surgical mask is actually pretty effective. And I'll link an article, a study below, showing how, especially for medical professionals, things like that are actually effective because there's a barrier from the actual water droplet getting into your system. And so something like a surgical mask, very cheap. You can load up on a bunch of them, get them before you need them. The second thing you can do, stock up on some food and water. If a quarantine hits your city, and there are already 5 or 6 cities in the United States now with confirmed cases by the CDC, if an outbreak happens near you or in your city, it's very likely that they'll restrict travel, they'll restrict you being able to get out of the city. They want to lock down and quarantine these places when an outbreak starts just to prevent it from spreading further. So stock up on some food and water. Buy some water cans off of Amazon, fill them up yourself. Those are going to last longer than something like water jugs that you might buy off the shelf at a store, and they'll last longer anyway. And then stock up on some non-perishable food. If you can't leave your house for a week or 2 weeks, it'll be necessary that you have some non-perishable foods just in case you're not able to leave your house. And if things get really bad and the store shelves are empty, you don't want to starve. Now, I say non-perishable instead of stocking up your freezer and your refrigerator, because if this thing gets really bad, it's possible that we might have grid problems, you might have electricity or utility outages, water outages for a certain amount of time. And so you don't want to be dependent on electricity. Maybe you have a propane grill outside that you can use to heat your food, cook your food. If you have a little propane camping stove, stock up on some gasoline and propane to run those things as well, just in case the grid goes down for a little bit of time. The average response in a natural disaster in America for emergency services to get to you, to give you some emergency water and food, is something like 14 days. And so you don't want to be just stuck, quarantined, sitting in your home, not being able to leave, and also not have any resources, food, water, or fuel in order to survive until life gets back to normal. In addition to that, even if the worst case scenario doesn't happen and you just don't want to leave because you don't want to risk exposure, you want to be able to have that option to have something to fall back on and stay inside your home instead of going out into public, crowded areas and trying to stock up on supplies when things start to get bad. And lastly, stock up on some physical cash. And you know I think cash is trash. I don't think that you should be using physical cash or dollars as an investment. You should keep your cash savings to a minimum. In a situation like this, though, we're not going to have a dollar crisis in a very short amount of time sourced from something like a coronavirus. And so stocking up on some physical cash, at least a couple $100s up to a couple $1,000 physical cash. That way, if we do experience grid issues, if electricity goes down, companies stop, exchanges stop, we have banking holidays, things like that, you have some cash on hand in order to buy and sell if you need to. Okay, now we're going to look at how to hedge your portfolio, not to speculate to make money, but just to protect, how to hedge your portfolio specifically in light of something like this coronavirus. Number one, buy physical gold. And I know that you've heard me hammer on this. We were talking about buying gold during what looked like it could be an outbreak of war in Iran. But every time one of these things happens, especially over the last couple of years, as global trade tensions have been rising, geopolitical tensions, Federal Reserve and other central banks printing money. Every time there's been a little catalyst here, a little catalyst there, it's pushed gold up higher and higher and higher. And so stocking up on physical gold, not proxies of gold, not derivatives of gold, physical gold is going to provide a hedge. And I say not derivatives of gold because right now there's potentially up to a 20-to-1 paper claim on all physical gold existing. And so if you get into a scenario where you're relying on your gold to hedge your portfolio and you're using derivatives, futures, mutual funds, ETFs that don't actually have the gold that they say they do, and they're just relying on those paper claims, there could be a run on gold and you might not actually have the hedge or the protection that you think you do. You only have it if you have it. And so a hedge of your overall investment portfolio is going to be holding physical gold. I usually recommend American Eagles because they're extremely recognizable, they're hard to fake, they're very liquid, they're easy to buy and sell, and they're tax-free. You can sell them, you don't have to pay any capital gains taxes. The second thing you can do is buy the dip in gold stocks, because ultimately if things get very bad here, people are going to realize that the gold stocks were selling off just as an initial market reaction because the price of gold is going to continue to go up, which means that some of the only companies out there which are going to be extremely profitable are going to be the gold stocks. One of my favorite gold stock mutual funds out there is Peter Schiff's gold stock mutual fund. You can get it at most of the major brokers. You can go to his website and get it directly from him as well. It's a gold stock mutual fund. They've got a lot of gold mining companies in there, and I think they've got some silver mining companies in there as well. And so this would be a situation where you can buy the dip in gold stocks because ultimately if things get worse, gold stocks are going to start to rally again as the price of gold takes off. And that will compensate for any other portions of your portfolio. Maybe if you have a lot of international exposure that's taking a hit from the contraction in global trade. So that's a way you can hedge your portfolio. The third thing is you can buy puts. You can use options. You can use options to bet on a fall in any index using options on ETFs or even the direct indexes themselves. And whatever area you have a lot of exposure to, whether it's real estate, international, US, large cap, mid cap, small cap, technology, healthcare, whatever it is, you can find an index or an ETF that trades that index. You can use options to protect yourself against a fall in that area. As the put, the option that bets on the fall, it will gain in value to compensate you for the value that you're losing on your actual portfolio. Something to keep in mind with hedges. Hedges cost money like fire insurance, but ultimately if you need them, you can't wait until you need them. Otherwise, it's too late. And so they cost you a little bit of money to protect your portfolio up front. And then if you need them, they're going to compensate you for your loss. If you don't know anything about options, I've got an options course. You can find it in the description below. And then finally, how to speculate. If you want to try and make some money on this instead of just protecting yourself, there are a couple ways you can do it. Whether this turns out to be small or large in terms of its impact, one of the things that you can do is you can bet on treasuries. And I know you're going to think this is crazy that I've never recommended treasuries or bonds for that matter, but the fact of the matter is a lot of people are still on the debt bandwagon. And if you look at an equity proxy for treasuries today, TLT is a symbol of a treasury ETF. You can look at, it's up about 1.5% today as of this recording. So the fact of the matter is when people expect heightened risk, they're going to jump into things like treasuries simply for the short-term return, not for the duration and the yield long-term. So one way you can speculate on this is you can buy options on TLT. I would not suggest actually jumping into bonds directly and outright, but you can speculate on that movement. The second thing that you can do is you can buy biotech stocks that have direct exposure to researching and developing antiviral medications, vaccines. And an article from the Motley Fool recently listed a couple great stocks that I don't know anything about these stocks. These are just examples of some companies that at least short term are benefiting from the fear of the coronavirus. One of these is going to be BioCryst Pharmaceuticals, symbol BCRX. It's had a big jump, especially from just a couple of weeks ago when fears were starting to come out originally. It was down at $1.50. It's above $3 now. And so this is a great example of a stock that you could use to speculate on the fears growing. Jump into something like this with a small portion of your portfolio. You could have some nice gains. Another good example of this is Inovio, symbol INO. A third example is mRNA, Moderna. And lastly, Novavax, NVAX. So these are some biotech companies. Again, they're just examples. I don't know anything about these companies, whether they're solid or whether they're garbage. But these are examples of companies that you could look at or companies like them that have some exposure to something that might do well during something like this happening. Now, something to note, the vast majority of the ETFs that have any exposure to healthcare, whether it's just a straight up healthcare index or whether it's biopharmaceutical company indexes, most of the ETFs have dropped from this. And so if you're going to speculate by looking at stocks or equities that have some exposure to researching antiviral medications or something that could help with the spread of the coronavirus, you're probably going to want to limit yourself to individual stocks instead of looking for an ETF, because overall it doesn't look like the healthcare industry is liking what's happening at this point, which makes sense because you're going to have a lot of costs. Your costs are going to go up unless you're the company that ends up finding the vaccine for the coronavirus. If you're just a hospital, you're probably going to just have, a ton of increased costs from all of the additional resources that you need to utilize and the lack of people being able to pay for those services, especially in America. So ultimately, right now, here's my prediction. Number one, this looks like an excuse for a sell-off. The same thing happened a couple of weeks ago when tensions rose in Iran, especially when they were sending missiles over. Coincidentally, the Fed pulled back the expansion of their balance sheet right around the same exact time. So it looks like the Fed is looking for a way out. They've got themselves between a rock and a hard place, but most of the rise in the stock market recently is a direct result of the Fed's expansion of their balance sheet. And so they're going to take opportunities like this, where people would naturally expect the stock market to be falling and contracting due to something like this. They're going to take those opportunities to pull back a little bit. And so this could very likely be one of the final shakeouts to shake out the people who are just, kind of scared about the market and going to sell at some point. This could be the final shakeout before that last blow off top of the market, before we really skyrocket up to the crazy bubble levels where everybody, that irrational exuberance really steps in and people just start piling on the train all at the final end. Now, a little bit less likely, but also possible, is that this could be the catalyst that unleashes all the bearish forces that are pent up in the market, that finally causes the Fed expanding their balance sheet to start to be useless, and some of the fake forces that have been pushing the market, keeping that recession at bay. This could be the catalyst, the trigger that kind of unleashes all the bearish forces onto the market, and we could start to see, an avalanche, a snowball effect hit the wider economy overall. So that's all I have for you. Summary of the takeaways: be prepared early. It's always better to buy fire insurance and not have your house burned down than it is to have your house burned down as a black swan event. Very few houses ever burn down anymore, and then to be caught without any fire insurance. Rule number 1 with investing: don't lose large amounts of money. Don't expose yourself to these massive blow-up risks. And so whether it's your pantry and you're stocking up on a bunch of boxes of mac and cheese, or whether it's your investing portfolio, you're buying a couple put options, you're buying the dip on the gold stocks, don't expose yourself to blow-up risk. Don't go all into cash. Don't go all into bonds. Don't go all into equities without any hedges or any protection. Be smart, be vigilant, stay on your toes, keep your eyes open, and stay tuned for more. If you liked the video, please like and subscribe. That really helps out the channel. Really appreciate you guys watching. Let me know your thoughts or questions in the comment section below. You guys have a great day.